Very good evening to all our viewers. Good morning if you're watching this from abroad. Uh, Today we have such a person in conversation with us who's come out with a new book called Collective Spirit, Concrete Action. It encapsulates the last few years, the 100 episodes of Mann Ki Baat by the Prime Minister. So we are here joined by Shashi Shekar Vempati ji, who was the former CEO of Prasar Bharti, and one of the few people who've observed behind the scenes approach to the political communication by the current regime, because it's quite a different one when you look at the world communication models. Different global media houses and different prime ministers and presidents, they have their own unique approach to political communication, and certainly Mr. Modi is quite friendly towards technology and has adapted to social media and different other platforms from time to time. In this book, he's captured the behind the scenes moments, the themes of Mann Ki Baat, and largely theorizes the last few years of political communication. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation. So as you can see, it's a new setup. That's because we are here at the new office of Swarajya. And from now on, we'll be back with our regular podcast. I know that it's been a while. I hope you enjoy this conversation and do leave comments below on what you thought about this particular episode. Welcome to Swarajya's new working space. You're the first guest here to be recording a podcast here, so something special for both of us here.
Very happy to be here. My first time at an environment like this. I think outside of a television studio. So very happy to have this conversation, and thanks for not doing it on Zoom, which is again norm of like this.
No, glad to have you here. And the book is released perfectly at a timing when the 100th episode of Mann Ki Baat also comes out. Do take us through the journey of how you conceptualize the book, and why it's coming right now, and what it tries to encapsulate basically.
Sure. So if you look at the entire gamut of work within Mann Ki Baat that the Honorable Prime Minister has been broadcasting now for more than 9 years, what you will see is that he's touched upon a number of themes, very diverse set of topics. In fact, I have a spreadsheet that I used while analyzing the transcripts of Mann Ki Baat as part of the research for this book, and I ran out of tabs because I probably never had a spreadsheet which had 25, 26 tabs. So that is the breadth of what he was doing within Mann Ki Baat. But also more interestingly, within each theme, he's touched on so many individuals, so many organizations, practically more than 100 in every instance of every theme. So that gives you a sense of the length and breadth of Mann Ki Baat, and what this book has tried to do is bring out that essence, bring out those stories, those life journeys, and it is in a sense a reflection of not only where India stands today, but the trajectory of its development over the next few decades.
I wanted to ask you this towards the end, but it's too tempting not to ask you right now. Give us a little idea about the behind the scenes when Mann Ki Baat got conceptualized, and how essentially there was a framing of this new political communication model by the new government.
See, the Prime Minister has always, been a digital innovator and an innovator in terms of how he communicates. If you look at his entire political career, he was the first one to embrace digital technologies. He was accessible through Twitter. He started live streaming his speeches through YouTube. I recall there was this Google Hangout in 2012, which was the first time a politician did a Google Hangout, and the servers of YouTube in India crashed that day. Right, so in that sense, he has always been, not been shy of experimenting and doing new stuff. And if you see what happened in the 2013-2014 time frame, right, he was the first one to use digital technologies to involve, professionals, people like us, as part of the political process through a volunteer platform, which was India 272 at that point. And then once he became Prime Minister and the new government was formed, you saw that same volunteer digital platform evolve into MyGov, which then became a citizen volunteering platform, where citizens were made part of the governance process. So Mann Ki Baat is in a sense part of that same continuum, where it has used broadcast technologies to scale this on a mass scale. So it's not just about one social media platform or one app, but it is to reach the entire length and breadth of India, and hence he chose radio, the oldest of communication medium, because of its wide geographical reach, and that was the part of the thought process. And in fact, he talks about it in one of the episodes of Mann Ki Baat, where he was referring to his career as the BJP's General Secretary, where he was traveling in Himachal and he happened to stop at a roadside tea stall, and he heard some breaking news on radio, and it struck him that how important radio is a medium continues to be to reach the far remote corners of India even today.
Right. And usually when a market survey is done, especially if you're into the media business, you usually target a certain market. Your demographics, become the key for market survival and everything. One of the studies I came across said that almost a billion people are at least aware of what Mann Ki Baat is, and obviously we can imagine that the number of people who listen to it or have listened to it is in millions. So in terms of that, did you have a particular category in mind as to that this should focus on a particular crowd, and how was it?
No, if you look at the Prime Minister's target audience, it is everyone, right? And that is reflected in the content of Mann Ki Baat. He talks about stargazing, he talks about exam anxiety, he talks about math, he talks about science. So he has the children, the younger audience, the students in mind. Then he talks of startups, he talks about sports, youth, so young adults, and then of course he then goes into topics which are of greater relevance to the larger society, be it farming, be it water conservation, swachhta, and so on. And then he also talks of culture in a big way, be it music, be it literature, quoting ancient slokas, quoting various poets across the different languages of India. So it's an entire spectrum of age groups that are within his target. And when you talk of that billion figure, it's really the reach, which is the cumulative reach of radio, where radio is not just his primary broadcast in Hindi, but also translated across more than 40 languages and dialects of India, and also several foreign languages as well as part of All India Radio's external services. So that is the radio audience, and then this is also the first visual radio program because it's not just a monologue and audio; it has visuals and graphics overlaid on it so that it can go on television. And what we had seen during COVID, for example, that more than 120 news channels, television channels in India were carrying Mann Ki Baat live. So that gives you a secondary, bigger audience through the visual medium. Then, of course, it's available on all the digital platforms, be it YouTube, be it the Narendra Modi app, also smart devices like Alexa. So this billion figure comes from this cumulative reach that is achieved through different modes of transmission.
And obviously, to achieve such a enormous amount of reach, it also has to be translated into multiple languages. And surprisingly, these are not just Indian languages, which are about 22, into which it's translated, but also 11 different foreign languages, including Mandarin, Swahili, and a few other languages. Tell us a little bit more about this.
Sure. So All India Radio is perhaps the most widely spoken radio platform, right? Because you talked about the 20 odd Indian official languages, but it's not just them. It is also a large number of dialects, especially if you go to the tribal districts of Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand or the 7 states of the Northeast. You're talking of a much wider linguistic diversity there, and all of that is captured by All India Radio. So it's more than 40 languages plus dialects in which Mann Ki Baat is translated. And you look at the foreign languages. So All India Radio has a long history of operating external services. They started in the shortwave era, around World War II, and that continues to date in several languages, but with new technology. So we've moved beyond shortwave. For example, you have an app called News on AIR, which has more than 200 live streams, which includes all of these external foreign language live streams of All India Radio. And more interestingly, in India, we also have a satellite platform called Free Dish. And the beauty of Free Dish is that it's free to air, it's unencrypted, and its footprint spills over India's borders. So people in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, including the Tibetan regions controlled by China, can receive these signals. So hence you have this wide footprint where the content in all these languages can be heard.
When you look at different political leaders across the world, Obama was very popular with, say, the late night show host. Nixon was known for the way he would address in his interviews and speeches. So, in retrospect, maybe since the government is almost touching 10 years right now, how would you say what is the style of functioning, especially when it comes to outreach programs and communication by this particular Prime Minister?
I think that's a very interesting question because, in fact, when I was looking at Mann Ki Baat, I was also looking at what are the other examples of leader to citizen communication models in different parts of the world. One example is what you see in the United States, where the presidents have a weekly weekend radio address, but that tends to be very partisan. You take partisan issues which are dominating the political news cycle, and that's also talked about. What is very unique about Mann Ki Baat, and which is where the communication approach to communication of this Prime Minister goes, is the non-partisan manner in which he is communicated, and the making sure that politics doesn't come into this communication mechanism while addressing issues that are relevant. So he's not only is he talked about small issues, he's talked about the big ones like Swachhta, water conservation. He's also talked about the trickiest ones like land acquisition or farm loss. So there is no bar on the topics, but the manner in which the conversation has been held has been done from a very non-partisan standpoint, so that it has the widest acceptance. I think that is what is very unique about this communication model, and also the use of technology. I think that is where it really stands out distinctively. Is that they have embraced modern technologies in a big way to make it a very dynamic, ever-evolving conversation.
Tell us a little bit more about the chapterization of the book, and especially, I don't know if I'm allowed to disclose this at this point. Dr. Jaishankar has written the
Oh, yeah,
foreword.
absolutely. So, we are very fortunate and thankful to the Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, for very graciously giving his time to pen a foreword for this book. And his foreword, in fact, brings out the soft diplomacy aspects of Mann Ki Baat in a big way. So that takes me to the chapter-wise structure of the book, which is very thematic. So you have a chapter which is focused on India's federalism and how Mann Ki Baat has played a very unifying role in bringing together the geographical diversity, the political diversity, and the linguistic diversity of India. Then there's a chapter focused on nationalism, how nationalism has been a very important continuous theme within Mann Ki Baat to motivate and engage the armed forces, our men and women in uniform, to continue that sentiment of patriotism through these 9 years, where various milestones were hit, be it the commemorating the Quit India movement, commemorating the 75 years of independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, and so on. Also, the chapter focuses on the very big areas of which have come to define PM Modi's tenure, which is Swachh Bharat, cleanliness, waste to wealth, environmental conservation, water conservation, with a specific emphasis on what he calls Jan Bhagidari, where people have been made a part of the process, right? Leveraging the power of communities, the power of individuals, their initiatives, and tying it to that larger goal. Then the book also looks at how he has, weaved culture to drive a lot of these initiatives, especially with festivals, where every festival has a certain significance, be it Diwali, be it Makar Sankranti, be it Raksha Bandhan, and he's used the essence, the emotive appeal of each of these festivals to put his initiatives within the context. So that is another chapter. Then you have a very important chapter which looks at how he has invoked ancient metaphors to make them relevant to the modern challenges and modern problems. Again, it goes back to science, ancient math, how water conservation was so important in our ancient culture, quoting various quotes from the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, Kabir ke dohe, Ravidas ke dohe, and so on. Also, poetry of Subramanya Bharati, for example, from Tamil Nadu, and so on. So he's looked at a very wide body of sources, ancient sources, to make his point. Then there is a chapter on India's soft power, which I mentioned, which looks at how he has engaged the diaspora, how he's engaged international leaders, global leaders like President Obama, for example, was with him on one episode of Mann Ki Baat. Then you have this example of the former Kenyan Prime Minister, whose daughter was in India for Ayurvedic treatment, and how her experience became a story in Africa around the potential of Ayush and so on. Then there are chapters which have looked at how he's engaged communities, how he's taken up issues of inclusion like gender, Divyangs, how he's focused on education, especially on reviving languages, on ensuring that as part of the national education policy, that education is delivered in the mother tongues in various parts of India. So all of these are part of the book, and I think the last chapter is very interesting to me because that is a new aspect which has not been focused that much in the public discourse, which is not only about the making of Mann Ki Baat, but various academic studies that have looked at Mann Ki Baat theoretically, that what is its potential, right? One aspect is languages, how the language body of knowledge within Mann Ki Baat can be leveraged. The other is the rhetorical tools, the manner in which he's communicated. So it's very interesting to look at the theoretical aspects apart from the practical stories that he brought out through Mann Ki Baat.
Thank you so much for that detailed explanation of this. I have a couple of more questions specifically about the book, and then maybe we'll have a fireside chat about the media today and a few things like that. One thing is that today, if you look at the edu-tech sector, it's a booming sector, and especially in the private space, you have a lot of people who are tuning into these programs which are offered by private entities. In that sense, I'm sure a lot of the youngsters today between the age of 18 to 35 are tuning into Mann Ki Baat and programs and speeches by the Prime Minister. So, is there any interesting story or angle that you can share with us where, UPSC aspirants, for instance, are a big market as well? So, do you get that sort of feedback regularly?
Yeah, a very interesting question, because if you look at the knowledge value of Mann Ki Baat, right, it's huge, because he talks about the ancient examples, like I mentioned earlier. He talks about modern day stories, change makers, who are taking up voluntary efforts, either it is in the context of building toilets, in the context of building dams, reviving water bodies, ancient water bodies, in terms of finding innovative methods of water conservation.
Yeah.
Right. So from a knowledge standpoint, I think Mann Ki Baat is a great go-to body of sorts for learning, and especially if you are a UPSC aspirant, or if you're someone who wants to contribute to the public service domain in India, you want to be a public servant. I think Mann Ki Baat is a mandatory reading for three reasons. One is, of course, building up your knowledge base, so you become more aware and you're more conversant with the various topics. Secondly, to understand how India is changing, right? It's a very interesting perspective into the developmental stories of different parts of India. And the third reason why you should go to Mann Ki Baat is as a karma yogi, as the Prime Minister often refers to public servants as. There is a certain spirit within Mann Ki Baat. It is a spirit of collective work, collaboration, collective work, so that we can achieve concrete results. And that spirit is something that every aspiring public servant, UPSC aspirant, has to imbibe. So in that sense, I would definitely recommend that Mann Ki Baat should be a go-to mandatory source of learning for anyone who has an aspiration to contribute to the public domain in India.
I think you also touch upon one more interesting part in the book, which is if you look at the successive line of prime ministers in our country, perhaps it is Prime Minister Modi who is most communicative or very innovative with communication models and all of that. And the other one goes quite back, is our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, through his writings and speeches. He was perhaps the first, and after that there was quite a big vacuum after that. So would you compare these two models and see how they work out?
Very, very interesting question, because on the one hand you have Nehru's discovery of India, which is sort of held up as milestone, a reference point, an authoritative source of India's history, and a lot of people refer to that. When I look at Mann Ki Baat, I think it stands very distinctively from Discovery of India. The Discovery of India to me is a view of India which is frozen in time, which is static, and which is not participatory in that sense. When I look at Mann Ki Baat, it is a view of India which is dynamic. It is not frozen in time. It is contemporary. It refers back to history. At the same time, it captures the present moment, and it also gives us a glimpse of the trajectory for the future. So to me, Mann Ki Baat is that way a significant evolution from how a Prime Minister of India is looking at India, where it was in the past, where it stands today, and where it aspires to go in the future.
And do you think the communication model, especially for this current prime minister, will keep on evolving, or is it sort of already structured in a certain way? Because if you look at the private media space, the age of podcasts is coming. Everybody's doing a podcast. So what do you think about being able to adapt to the particular time?
I think there's nothing frozen in time, nothing static about this Prime Minister, right? As and when new technologies have presented themselves, he has very innovatively adapted to them and leveraged them. Be it social media, 10 years back, Twitter and Facebook and so on. Be it live streaming with YouTube, like I spoke about. Be it using 3D technology for rallies. Be it Chai Pe Charcha, which was a very interesting, innovative format during the 2014 campaign. Be it the Narendra Modi app, which is not just a regular app, but it also has these volunteering features as well, where he's able to connect the citizens, he's able to connect with the party workers, he's able to connect with a very large cross section of society through that app. So in that sense, he has continuously evolved and innovated on his communication approach. And so to me, it's a continuous process, and it goes back to who he is. When you look at Prime Minister Modi, unlike Jawaharlal Nehru or any of the other prime ministers, he comes to the office not with a worldview which is informed through theory and theoretical rigor and informed through a lot of formal sort of learning. Instead, his whole learning is experiential. It is through his formative years, his life journey, his what the various situations, various circumstances, various incidents, anecdotes have taught him, and he comes with that experiential knowledge, and that is why you see that he's able to very quickly relate to the cross section of India on various subjects, and is able to find very practical solutions to the challenges that the country is facing.
So let me also ask you a few questions that are relevant to your line of work, and let me shoot straight on this. Do you think TV as a medium, or even radio for that matter, is relevant today?
That's a great question. In fact, I think that's a debate that's perhaps happening the world over on what is the future of broadcasting. For example, the current head of the BBC, I think, has gone on record some time back saying that they envision a future for BBC without broadcasting. I don't know what the BBC would be without broadcasting. It will just be another British company, for all you know, right? So I don't see that the relevance of broadcasting is going to reduce. However, the manner in which we consume broadcasting will change. It has to change, given the influx of digital technologies, the increased use of smartphones and smart devices for consuming media, where people expect highly targeted content, highly personalized content, and also a very interactive kind of content. So in that world, where does broadcasting reside? What is its future? I think is something that every public broadcaster in general and broadcast media in particular across the world are trying to figure that out. Where I can see a value for television going forward, I think COVID-19 was a great moment which showed us why television and broadcast media will continue to be very important. The first was, of course, for authentic news which is very credible. In fact, there were two studies done by the Reuters Institute for Journalism in the Oxford University, and both those studies in succeeding consecutive years found that DD News and AR News were the most trustworthy when it came to news in India. I think that is a very important, significant data point which tells us that at the time of crisis, at a time when all the other lights go out, people will turn to the public broadcaster for information, and we saw that during COVID-19. So that is the primary reason why I think broadcasting will continue to be very important. The second reason, again during COVID-19, we saw that when schools were shut, you had and people started doing online classes. The large part of India, which was left out, and the only way those children could get any education was through television, through the educational channels. So there's a very important social responsibility that broadcasting will continue to serve, especially in a country like India, which is so diverse, which has so many challenges. So that is the second reason why I see future for broadcasting. The third reason why it will continue to be important, especially for a democracy, an open democracy like India, is that we cannot be held hostage to algorithms and large tech platforms. If you look at what has happened in India over the years, gradually we have disintermediated, gatekeepers of information, people who control opinion, people who control news. It started with live streaming on YouTube. It started with directly communicating through Twitter. Perhaps the next evolution there is to also disintermediate the big tech platforms. Look at what happened with Russia and Ukraine during the conflict, where at the flick of a button, one point of view was completely shut off YouTube. Right?
So you're planning to generate some more unemployment in the media space?
Well, no. I think there is. I would say perhaps there is opportunity for more employment, but with a different approach. So today there is, for example, new technology that's available, where you can directly broadcast to mobile phones. It's called direct to mobile broadcasting, and that is something that if India embraces, then that gives you strategic independence from the big tech platforms. So if the Prime Minister has to deliver Mann Ki Baat, he has to talk directly to the citizens. He no longer has to be dependent on a YouTube algorithm or a Facebook algorithm to show that live stream to consumers. He can directly reach your mobile phones, and that is going to be more and more important going forward, because people are going to watch less and less conventional television. They're going to consume content more and more on these devices. Hence, the ability to broadcast to them directly is going to be very important.
This is very interesting what you just said, Shashiji, because I have a two-parter follow-up on this. One is that when you look at public broadcasting mechanisms, you look at BBC, you look at different Russian and Venezuelan channels and all of that, there's still a lot of credibility associated with the Indian public broadcasting system. Why and how is that different from, say, the other countries' model? And secondly, you spoke about the pandemic and how it sort of affected the communication system of this particular government and the Prime Minister in particular. Give us a little behind the scenes idea about when there were tense moments, or moments when even the Prime Minister is after all a person. He gets emotional, he gets carried away, presumably sometimes. So there will be tense moments when it's difficult to record, or you have to change a script or something like that. Give us a little insight into that.
So let me take that last part first, because the Prime Minister himself has spoken about this, where he's talked in the context of Mann Ki Baat that he's had to do re-record it several times sometimes because he gets very emotional. In fact, if you look at the entire spectrum of emotions within Mann Ki Baat, it's largely positivity, largely happy moments, largely about empathy. But then there are those rare moments where he's also expressed anger, and one of them was like the Pulwama attack after that, and the surgical strikes that were conducted, where you see anger as an emotion making its appearance on Mann Ki Baat. So in that sense, broadcasting is all about this spectrum of emotions and reaching out to the citizens. And there will be different moments. There will be difficult moments. There will be happy moments, and to capture all of them, and to be able to establish that connectivity between the leadership of the democracy and the citizens, I think is very important. Which takes me back to the first part of your question, that how is the public broadcasting in India different from the rest of the world? And as I said earlier, we are a very diverse country. We have all kinds of extremities: geographical, socio-economic, cultural, and so that imposes several obligations on the public broadcasting. Right? There are several dialects in the underdeveloped regions of India, which are very essential if we have to communicate to the tribal communities of that zone. Think of COVID-19 communication. It's not just about Hindi or English. It is about explaining to every corner of India in multiplicity of languages and dialects the consistent same messaging about vaccinations, about wearing masks, whether about keeping safe distance, all the precautions and so on. In fact, there was one study which looked at social messaging during COVID-19, and it found that DD News and Doordarshan had the highest quantum of social messaging,
Right.
because that is the important role that the public broadcaster plays. So that is very different from public broadcasting in many of the other countries, where they don't have this kind of obligations and responsibilities, and they have the luxury of large amount of funding which comes their way through license fees. So you have a large amount of money and a small set of obligations. So obviously you can build brands like Al Jazeera or BBC. In India, it's the reverse. It's the equation is flipped, where we have a large set of obligations and a small pool of money within which you have to deliver these services, and that is the challenge of public broadcasting in India, and that is why DD and AR continue to be very highly credible and highly trustworthy, because they have to operate within these constraints and deliver on these obligations.
Very interesting conversation, and thank you for giving me a break from breaks doing podcasts as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, and do look into our main camera and tell our viewers where they can find your book and why they should read it. And I would let you do the plug now.
Sure. So thanks for having me, and it was an enjoyable conversation. So the book was again called Collective Spirit, Concrete Action, Mann Ki Baat and its Influence on India, and it is published by Rupa Publications. In fact, a word of thanks and acknowledgements to the excellent editorial team at Rupa, who challenged me in ways that I didn't think I would be challenged in writing this book, and they kept up with the demanding timeline that this book required. So you can buy it on Amazon, and I'm sure you'll find it on all your local bookstores very soon, perhaps this weekend. And you can also look it up on the Rupa's website as well to get the latest links to the various online stores. So those are different ways in which you can get this book, and I'm told that there will also be an ebook option as well available very soon.
Thank you so much for joining us. Pleasure having you.